who runs the media and writers firm, a content development and reputation management hub. Rich, good morning to you. Welcome to the show. Rich, good morning. Okay, I think we seem to be having a slight problem. I believe I've just seen the notice on my screen there that his call got cut, but we're definitely going to try and get hold of Rich once again. And I think this comes against the background of journalism and ethics. And we see this very, very often lately with regard to anonymous sources. And we see sometimes headlines in mainstream media and the key issue here is how accurate, how truthful, how objective, how impartial, how fair, how accountable are journalists? And these are questions that Rich is raising. Rich is back with us. Rich, good morning to you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Right.
I guess this is a very important discussion because journalism is at the heart of informing and educating people. And if we misinform and uneducate, it's not a good thing.
Well, certainly, and I think the thing is when we're talking about anonymous sources, Rich, we see this very, very often lately. We've seen headline news. We've seen so much where journalists cover and the sources seem to remain anonymous. But the key issue here is, do they meet some of the essential elements of journalism?
Yes, indeed. I must say that this issue of anonymous sources is not new. Even during the First World War, I've done some research and found out during the First World War and the other wars that we've had around the world, this issue was raised. Even at the beginning, when journalists were beginning to form their own organization, this issue was raised. So it's more than 200 years old. The question is what you use anonymous sources for. There are advantages of having anonymous sources. Like, for example, do you know or do you think that we would have had the Zondo Commission if we did not have those hundreds of emails which were shared to in newspapers and the media 4 years ago related to Gupta Gate? We wouldn't. And we still don't know who actually uploaded and gave those sources and those emails, which actually prove that there was something called state capture. So in that regard, I would say I support the work of anonymous sources when they are acting according to public interest. But unfortunately, there are anonymous sources who are not acting according to the public interest, but according to their stomach. In other words, a businessman would plant a damaging story against an opponent because they want to kill their business. A politician would plant a damaging story against a political opponent because they want to kill their political chances. That's where I say that when you are a journalist, when you get information about the fact that a certain businessman is doing something which is damaging to the public interest, then as a journalist, you have to make sure that you cover all your ground. As I have mentioned here, when I quoted Jim Lehrer, when he said, you need to cover and you need to write and present every story with the care I would want if the story were about me. You need to assume that there is at least one other side of the version of every story. And then you need to assume that the viewer is as smart and as caring and as good as a person as you are. And then you go on. Then he says, unfortunately, do not use anonymous sources for blind code except on rare and monumental occasions. Let's underline the word monumental occasions. On the issue of the Gupta Gate and the fact that everything is unraveling in the Zondo Commission, those are monumental occasions. So let me stop there. Just explain that we are not saying, or I'm not saying that anonymous sources are useless. I'm saying that anonymous sources can be used, but as a journalist, you must do your homework. Unfortunately, there are some journalists who don't do their homework. What they do is they take whatever they're being given by an anonymous source as the gospel truth, when actually it's not.
Exactly, and I suppose this is where, Rich, the responsibility comes in. And when we speak about these essential elements of journalism in terms of establishing accuracy, what is truthful, and at the same time to be impartial and to take accountability for what journalists obviously share in the media in general. And this is where you make the point that in terms of being accountable, also when you look at the editors, for instance, and for people obviously to be less skeptical of these anonymous sources. There are certain processes that need to be put in place to make sure that the information is credible and it can actually stand the test.
Yes, indeed. So when you are an editor of a newspaper, when your journalist or your reporter comes with a story, which comes from an anonymous source, you need to invoke or put on the table the checks and balances. For example, in my time as a journalist, you could never use a story, even if it's true, unless you've got 3 people who confirm the story. If the story is so monumental, as our friend Jim Lehrer has said, at least use more than 5 sources. Make sure that you cover all your ground to make sure that all the points that are being made have been checked and rechecked. The famous newspapers across the world, including the Washington Post and the New York Times, have been stung by people who came with stories which were not true. That's why they have guidelines. Every day when a journalist comes with a story, an editor or a news editor will come out with a booklet and say, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? In some cases, those journalists are even supposed to go and only confess to the editor and even the publisher. So you need to go to the editor and say, by the way, my anonymous source is Rich, right? And then I've checked it with Tandiwe. And I've also checked it with Jacob. And I've also checked it with Susan. And these checks and balances have worked, and the story is correct. If you don't do that, then it means you are biased. The other thing is this: when someone comes and plants a story to you, you need to ask yourself, why me? And what is this person wanting to gain? If the journalist has been sent by someone and has got an axe to grind, then you should be careful, because you're going to be used either as a business pawn or as a political pawn. For example, yesterday I was reading a story about the elections in America where the Trump people wanted to plant a story to say that Joe Biden was benefited from his science business dealings in Russia and China and in the Ukraine. But they couldn't prove that. So they got together with the journalists from the Washington Post. They gave him lots of emails, and those emails, there was nowhere where you could link Joe Biden to it. But of course, the question was whether they were true. Yes, some of them were true because the Sun did do some business there. But when the editor of the Wall Street Journal checked and found that actually they would be linking, it would be unfair to link Joe Biden, they didn't run the story. But guess what? The New York Post did actually run the story, but didn't actually blame Joe Biden. But they had a way. So it does not mean that you can't cover the story if you have an anonymous source. It's just that you have to cover your ground. So that's what I was talking about.
Well, Rich, I must say, very, very interesting. And I found this article extremely interesting. And even for us here in the media, on the digital platforms as well, there's a lot of food for thought for us here and a lot for us to actually think about because, we do the interviews. We also report on a number of issues as well. So I must say it's been a great help and it's been an education for me personally. I must say, thank you very much for that.
I appreciate that. I hope everyone is listening, and I hope everyone realizes that we do need anonymous sources. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having these things. You need to go back and read The President's Men, a book that was written by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward many years ago about the fall of Richard Nixon. That was an anonymous source.
All the President's Men, yes.
All the President's
Yes, I recall that.
Yeah, that was an anonymous source. He was called Deep Throat because he had inside information about the fact that the president was doing something. The president and his party were doing something that's wrong. That led to the resignation of Richard Nixon. So the work of the anonymous source there did actually help. But in many cases, people, careers, and businesses get destroyed by lies where journalists do not actually cover their ground and make sure that they actually check their stories. They may be true, but there are others which are simply a thumbsuck.
Well, I must say, Rich, thank you very much for that. And I must say, inspiring, stimulating as always, and we thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks a lot, my brother.
Rich Mkhondo joining us this morning. He runs the media and writers firm and www.mediaandwritersfirm.com, which is a content development and reputation management hub. Some real food for thought for all of us here.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece.